Within the annals of internet lore, there are few individuals who have been branded with the title of Menace. But the individual that's the subject of today's video has more than lived up to that title. It's not exactly a secret that when compared to real life, the internet has a far higher tolerance for behaviour that would otherwise be deemed offensive or inappropriate. So for someone to not only be condemned, but blacklisted from a majority of the internet for artwork they created, they must be a uniquely disturbing case of either taking a joke way too far, or an instance of when one's darkest and most depraved desires can no longer be contained to the rotting annals of their mind and spill forth into the world. Meet Shad Prajan, aka Shadman. Whilst most discussion of Shadman concerns his artwork depicting characters of dubious age, many are unaware of his more recent history, featuring his arrests, drug abuse, and convictions for violent crimes. There are a lot of videos already made about his controversial art, but in this video I'm going to try to gather together every scrap of information that exists on his life and try to paint a comprehensive story, stretching from his childhood through to his career as an artist and subsequent downfall. More so than any other individual I've spoken about, Shad has been incredibly careful when it comes to revealing information about his private life. This cautiousness was at first thought to be due to his own shyness and preference for personal privacy, but as more information emerged about him, it became clear that a key factor of his secrecy was to ensure that his real identity couldn't be associated with the antics of his online, self-described, villainous alter ego. This video will obviously touch on some off-kilter topics, but I'm assuming you're already aware of that. Okay, let's just dive in. Shad Prajan was born September 9th, 1990, somewhere in Switzerland, to a Swiss mother and American father. His dad, Thaddeus, had emigrated from Louisiana and was actually a semi-well-known reggae singer, with one of his songs having some interesting similarities to the life of his son.
Hoping for the sun's quick return. Word someone was coming, causing eye and heart to burn.
Shad was raised in an incredibly religious household, with his father banning anything that could be considered ungodly, and allegedly using physical violence as a punishment.
Where you get beaten, you gotta know that the fear of God lives in you. That's what my dad used to do to me. I turned out pretty okay.
One such beating is reported to have taken place following Shad receiving poor grades at school. Shad's academic struggles could be due in part to the fact that his family would frequently move around the country.
So we never stayed in a single place long enough to gather any lasting friends at the time.
With him citing his family's frequent relocation as a reason why he struggled to make friends.
In situations like that, your siblings become your best friends. It's safe to say we're all very close.
We know that Shad had a handful of siblings, however the exact number is still unknown. It's been deduced he has at least one brother, and Shad himself has admitted to having a younger sister.
One thing made me start to grow distant from my little sister, which is my interest in drawn and animated pornography.
Throughout his lonely childhood, a young Shad would discover his love for art through the medium of video games, and it's here that he would begin to draw, inspired by the characters and worlds of the games he played. The young Shad would also develop another passion, coding and web design. He would combine these two passions when he created a website that would one day become shadbase.com. Shad would use this little website to show off his art, using it as a digital portfolio and also a testament to his coding abilities. After leaving school, Shad would decide to pursue a career in game design.
And I thought, like, you know what'd be really cool? If I could make video games. Because I loved video games.
Yeah.
However, his lackluster educational qualifications meant he was unable to apply to many game design courses in the country. But through a stroke of luck, one university, the F&F School for Art and Media Design in Zurich, would see his online artwork, and based solely on the raw talent he demonstrated there, decide to give Shad a chance, by offering him a place on one of their game design courses starting the following academic year.
I was completely undereducated, but sometimes they let people in when they think, I see potential in this guy, and they let him in anyway. But next to making my portfolio, I also have an online portfolio. So I made this website called shadbase.com, and I used it as my online portfolio.
Yeah.
And I just put up like some of my work I've done, like some of my like amateur like digital paintings and stuff, and I sent them in a portfolio. They've looked into it and thought like, we'll give you a chance. We usually don't do this, but we'll give you a chance. After summer, you can start.
With a place secured at university, finally studying something he was passionate about, Shad was left with a final few months to enjoy the end of his teenage years and prepare for the transition into adult life. But it's what he did in these few months that would change the course of his life forever. Shad himself states that during these months he found himself incredibly lonely, and in his loneliness he would begin to explore himself. No, not like that. He would explore his mind and create artwork of the not safe for work variety. Oh, maybe he did do some exploration.
The whole summer went by, kind of started to get the courage to look deep inside, like the darkest corners of myself.
Yeah.
The corners where I never would have seen myself, and I kind of explore those and like see that I have a friend in there.
Yeah.
And I explore that and like do some drawings which were very questionable morally.
What set his work apart from the creamy tidal wave of not safe for work art already on the internet was the indeterminate age of his drawn characters. Later on his website, he would slap a big ol' all characters are over 18 even if stated otherwise disclaimer. But I'm sure most would agree simply having the need to put such a disclaimer up like that is a pretty big indicator you're entering some highly sketchy territory. Shad describes this period of artistic exploration as him simply learning to accept himself, and creating art that was a true expression of his own abilities. But as would soon be made apparent, not everyone shared his artistic perspective. He would post all this art to shadbase.com in a separate section from his professional portfolio.
Like, hey, I'll just upload them to this portfolio site I made. Make like an extra category and start uploading a little more alternative stuff.
Yeah.
But still just as accessible to anyone who wished to view it. During this time, Shad would first make contact with another up-and-coming online creative, Corey Beck, better known as SpazKid. This was prior to SpazKid's explosion in popularity that came with his Sonichu animated series, but this connection nonetheless would prove invaluable later on. At the end of summer, Shad would begin his university career in game design, but after a few weeks, Shad would be called into a meeting by university staff, where they would bring up what was now viewable on Shad's website.
I get like this weird email.
Oh no.
And it's like, can you meet us on Friday? Can you please meet us at this specific address? And like, leads me into this building. We go up an elevator. We go into like this secluded room. They broke the bomb and said, we found some stuff on your website, which is highly illegal, and we cannot allow you back on the campus.
Oh wow.
Because you're a menace.
Okay, I feel I don't need to bring up the logistical issues of putting alongside your professional portfolio, but having that be extremely risque, like even by standards. Like, yeah, the university wasn't gonna hear you out. Like, I beat my edging PR all the time, but I don't stick it on my LinkedIn. When retelling the story, Shad appears to be very cautious to not actually describe what the university found, and obviously painting himself as this edgy rock and roll badass, whose Sigma demeanor sent chills down the spines of all the university bigwigs.
It's also kind of like with my whole appearance and stuff at the time, like I was quite into like heavy metal and stuff, and that also was like for people like those, like kind of like conservative art professors, was a kind of a red flag.
Very kind of
because of the whole like satanic themes and like the glorification of violence, such in that.
Yes, Shad, I'm sure at your art university you were the only one who dressed in an alternative style.
Raw time.
Take it easy, babe.
Shad's primary defense seemed to be that all of his not safe for work stuff was totally unrelated to his university work.
Them like telling me that it proved that they're nothing but an agents of treachery themselves.
Right.
By like denying my right to express myself in my own free time, completely independent,
disconnected from what
I do in school.
It was stuff he did in his free time, and therefore the university had no business looking into it. I like to turn women into chandeliers, but that's on my time, University of Slough. Despite the stellar defense of none of your business, Shad was ordered to gather his shit and leave the university. He was also instructed to hand himself in to authorities.
The thing is, I don't believe his story he told. His story about getting kicked out of his original country. I always took it as an exaggerated statement about he probably was just kind of a creep and they threw him out. And he had to make it like, I was so badass. I was so incredible. Because have you guys not noticed that a lot of internet personalities really like to talk up how badass they are? And some of the reason that they bring in these things is to reaffirm how fucking cool they are to you. They need to remind you. I just took it as him exaggerating. I didn't buy it. I never believed it.
To top this all off, when taking the train back home, Shad was stopped by police, where they found he was in possession of a large knife. Shad would make it home and went to the police, where he was then interrogated about his art. For these drawings, and on top of the earlier knife possession, he was fined 2,800 Swiss pounds. After all this, Shad would accept that he was unlikely to pursue any serious creative career.
I was definitely thinking I'm not going to do anything creative for the rest of my life. Like, I'm not going to do any, not for a job, I'm not going to do it. I told myself I'm going to just quit. I'm gonna.
You thought you were just gonna do like a desk job the rest of your life?
Yeah, I just thought like I'll just come with me. Like but did not consider that would ever do like anything creative.
With no real goals or directions, Shad would decide to get his mandatory military service out the way as soon as possible. Shad would join the military and was assigned as an artillery tankman. Even in something as famously fraternal as the military, Shad would fail to make any long-term connections. But his comrades would quickly come to notice and respect his artistic ability, with him actually designing an emblem for his tank that wound up placed on the side of the vehicle.
See, here's the tanks. It's a bit of it's just Instagram fucking downscales this shit. But yeah, this was our tank battalion. And yes, I did make the logo here on the side too. All the tanks had them.
I know these vehicles aren't technically in service, but if World War III does break out in Europe, there is a not impossible chance that someone may be killed by a Shadman branded tank. But seriously, his sketches from this time, in my opinion, most clearly highlight the insane talent he has for drawing. Out of all the artists I've covered from Newgrounds, I'm confident in saying that Shad exhibits the most raw artistic ability out of any one of his peers. It's also why I don't subscribe to later criticism thrown his way that he can't draw or was never a talented artist. Like, the man has talent. After a few months training and operating his iconic tank, Shad's time in the military would come to an end, leaving him once again at the mercy of fate, and unsure of what to do with himself. Despite swearing off any creative career path, Shad would eventually decide to try once more to break into the video game industry, joining a currently unknown indie studio where he found himself doing design work for an unknown Penguin-based game.
Okay, let's just be graphic design artists. That sounds pretty neat. The things they had me do there were like designing, like drawing penguins for an iPhone game.
Oh my god, I remember that, dude.
Shad would soon leave the studio, his reason being he couldn't stand having to work within someone else's guidelines. He therefore made the decision to try and go it alone as a solo internet artist. His decision likely supported after seeing the success many of his contemporaries such as SpazKid were achieving on Newgrounds. To begin this new career, Shad would revive his old Shad-based website, and would begin a new webcomic that he would upload there. Each page of the webcomic can basically be boiled down to what if game/anime character, but sex? He would also begin to upload his infamous series of lolly and Shota art. During these early years, Shad would claim that criticism of his art would mostly relate to things like his art style. I think if you're earnestly critiquing the aesthetic qualities of your cartoon lolly porn, you probably need to reevaluate some life choices. Alongside this relaunch of his website, he would decide to create a new online persona to accompany his new identity on the web. And so it's here the internet would first be introduced to the Shadman. The Shadman, or just, in quotations, Shadman, is the character/persona most people associate with Shad's art and Shad himself. The skeleton wearing an overtly fashy uniform would serve as a visual stand-in for the otherwise camera-shy Shad, an intentionally villainous alter ego to accompany the controversial artwork he made. This persona also provided yet another layer of ironic defense to criticism thrown his way. If you took offense to his content, well, it was just a character. It wasn't Shadai, it was Shadman. Not only do you now have to separate the art from the artist, but also separate the artist from the persona. This defense would be an excuse frequently used by Shad going forward. Shad would eventually bring this character into the real world, with an outfit that he would don for live streams and a few rare IRL appearances. Oh yeah, it's worth noting that throughout his career, Shad has generally tried to conceal his face as much as he possibly can. As mentioned earlier, it's unknown if this was because he didn't want to be associated IRL with his art, or if he was just self-conscious.
He had to wear a mask in person. We went to a restaurant, this is before COVID. He would wear a mask in public because he thought he was that relevant of a figure, that he had to, like, hide his face in shadows. But no, somebody like that, he was the only one I knew in that group where he was, like, covering his face and everything and making a big spectacle out of it.
This is also why I only have, like, 3 fucking photos to use as stock when I want to talk about the guy. Oh yeah, just to make this even more convoluted, there's some confusion over who the real Shad is under many of the photographed characters. Many have gone to cons, etc., and claim to be the real Shad, despite not being him, and Shad has intentionally played into this, confirming false sightings, so it's hard to tell what's a real Shadman and what's an imposter. It's also why you see a lot of people under the false impression that Shad was actually this super buff guy in real life. I'm actually pretty sure I know who the buff Shadman imposter is, but we'll get to him later. Shortly after deciding to go it solo, Shad would decide to move to Canada. His reasons for leaving Switzerland aren't 100% known, but a popular theory is that he was kicked out of his home after drawing porn of his mother. Doing something like this would seem like justifiable grounds to disown a child, and it does always pop up whenever people discuss the worst things Shad has done. However, In all my research, I have not found a single piece of evidence that can prove this actually happened. There is an image purported to be the one in question, but it doesn't bear any resemblance to his actual mother, nor does it have any traditional MILF-like qualities. Trust me, I would know. Every time I tried to find a source for the maternal connection, I was met with "I heard it somewhere," or "everybody just knows it." On Sleepycabin, there are mentions of the others meeting Shad's parents, so the disowning story doesn't seem to hold much water, unless they came to very quickly forgive their son. My guess is that he probably just made it as a joke on one of his lost live streams, and people just took it at face value and spread it around. All things considered, knowing Shad, it wouldn't even be that bizarre of a thing for him to do. In July 2009, Shad would make his Newgrounds page, where he would post a selection of his non-pornographic or less explicit art. His Newgrounds was the avenue where most of the internet would first be introduced to Shad, and from here, visitors would be directed over to his webpage to see everything else he had made. Newgrounds, back then at least, didn't have an outlined set of rules when it came to pornographic content, and so Shad was able to toe a close line between provocative and shit that would get you instantly banned. Shad would also begin to grow close to other Newgrounds creators, and these friendships would grow strong enough that in 2010, after a year and a half of living in Canada, Shad would move down to America to live in Philadelphia on the recommendation of his friend Spaz Kid, and influenced by the fact that his dad's American citizenship would grant him immediate residence in the US with no need for a visa. In Philadelphia, he would become close friends with other members of the Newgrounds crew, hanging out with them IRL and assisting them in the production of their own animations. As Shad grew increasingly popular, he would begin to branch out onto other platforms, such as a Facebook that now sits abandoned, a Tumblr that's since been banned, and a YouTube where he would upload speed drawings of his artwork, and occasionally make videos where he would talk to his audience about topics relating to art that interested him. If you look at the sub count of this channel, even after 6 years of inactivity, you really can gauge how popular this guy was during his prime in the 2010s. The only other site of note is his Twitch, where during his streams he would answer fan questions and even invite them on to talk one-on-one. Some of these conversations are the most prime form of cringe content I think I've ever encountered.
I had a similar situation, but I was on the bus, and I think I made a joke or something, and apparently the person behind me, his sister, was raped, and he got up in my face about that, and I was just, the guy behind me, he was like, you know, my sister was raped, and I don't think that's funny. And I looked at him, I was like, anything's a joke if I can make something or somebody laugh, And he got real defensive about it. He was like, I don't think anything that can harm somebody or offend somebody is funny. I looked at him and I said, I don't care.
You should have said...
I made another...
No, you should...
I said, I don't care, and then I made another rape joke.
I'll take fake stories for 500. Despite the kind of art Shad made, he had yet to find himself embroiled in an actual controversy. However, that would change in March of 2012, when animator Ed Gold would pass away from leukemia. Ed was somewhat prolific in the online animation space, and so as other creators expressed condolences and sadness at his passing, Shad had something else in mind. On the 26th of March 2012, Shad would update shadbase.com with an image depicting Ed Gold being molested by the Grim Reaper. It didn't take long for people to reach a consensus that, there is a limit and Shad had just crossed it. The image was taken down and Shad would defend himself by stating that this was his own way of processing grief, and also that the public didn't really know his relationship to Ed, and Ed would most likely have been amused by such a drawing. Nevertheless, the image would stay down, and for the first time, people began to question what the motivation behind Shad's art was. Edgy is a term that pops up in almost all conversation about Shad, and it's about here that you see people begin to question Shad's artistic intentions. Until this point, his approach to art had been to maximize content output, getting as much crap out on the site as possible. But around this time, he would realize that his online career had more potential than being just one of thousands of porn artists.
Kind of 2013, 2014, 2015, they were like very, very important for me. I feel like I've grown a lot there, like just knowing about things, and I started to draw as much as I possibly can. I've just been putting out tons of shit. But then I kind of got into this thing where like I discovered streaming, and I discovered other things, and I discovered like that there's other ways besides drawings to talk to people, to reach out to people online, to be able to express myself online. And that's when I kind of started to not draw as much as I possibly can anymore.
With the help of his Shadman alter ego, Shad began to transition his career into that of traditional online personality, albeit one whose brand could still be boiled down to porn. By 2015, Shad was living with Corey, Oni, Zach, and Stamper in their infamous Philadelphia house.
So this guy, he didn't have to pay rent, he was so fucking poor looking for a job. This guy.
Shad would make a few appearances on the Sleepycast podcast. It's from these appearances we would come to learn a vast majority of what we know now concerning his days in Switzerland.
The police took me out, searched me, and found a knife on me, which was larger than I was legally allowed to possess.
From these appearances, it's clear Shad holds some pretty interesting beliefs. One that sticks out to me is how he prides himself on never going to the hospital. Clearly this man is a homo superior. Look at this fucking specimen cat! Despite his boasting, Shad would actually announce on one of his streams that he did have certain health conditions.
But sometimes I have certain health problems. I did discover that I have certain health problems. But that has nothing to do with my physical condition. That's because I do certain things that I shouldn't. Just keep it at that.
The other host's hesitance to press him about his art has been pretty well discussed. However, I think it's important to bear in mind that this was before he had done anything really bad. The standpoint most seem to have is that if it's drawn, then it's not real and can't harm anyone. It's a perspective that was far more common in 2015 and shared by most of the internet. And since then, each member has in some way indicated that they no longer support Shad or his art. So when people say X or Y was once friends with Shad and therefore they're evil, But to be fair, Shad has some moments where he makes a point so outrageously brain dead. It does get quite frustrating to see nobody even attempt to dispute the sewage that just came out of his mouth.
I think there's a huge hypocrisy with the whole child pornography thing. Like this unspoken thing that's so, like, the majority of grown guys are into it. However, they will not admit to it. You think so? And that shows by, you know, the majority. You know what the most popular pornography
are you saying the majority of people are into that?
Teen. Yes, you know, teen.
You hear that, guys? Shad can't be a deviant because you, yes, you the viewer are a nonce. I've notified authorities. Their willingness to defend Shad may have been bolstered by Shad himself, who was described as exceptionally polite and shy in public.
We were all out having dinner earlier.
And my friend Shad was there, and Shad is a very quiet, respectful young man who doesn't...
He doesn't do anything bad.
He doesn't... No, he doesn't instigate much shit, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
When the meal was finished, he wrote his receipt, and I grabbed it, and I drew a really, really cringy picture of him on it. I made him look like a retarded Simpsons character, and then I put a speech bubble saying, "Take it easy, babe." I showed it to him, and he was like, "What the fuck? I am so embarrassed. I want to leave now." So funny. Here's the picture.
As the story ends, be sure to throw up the photo.
Here it is.
There are actually some indications that not everyone was totally chill with Shad even back then.
Everybody that we knew was like, no, drawings are just drawings. They can't hurt anybody. He's the nicest guy. Like, you should really be friends with him. And then he'd come over and it'd be like, hey, so you want to talk about how Hitler was right and he knew what he was... I'm doing a shitty impression.
I know, but that is what he would do every time. That's why we keep hearing things about how he's so nice. And it's like, no, I know what you mean by nice now. It's that he's going to align with the shitty things you like to do too.
In a video on the Only Plays prequel channel, Rice Pirate Plays a Game, other Sleepycabin collaborator Johnny Utah has a pretty tense discussion with Shad about pedophiles.
All pedophiles...
Pedophilia is wrong.
Pedophilia is wrong. Pedophiles should be burned alive.
I never said that.
I did. Pedophiles should be burned alive. Their eyeballs should be scooped out first, and then they should be burned alive. And then, what else? What else did I say?
What gives you the right? What gives you the right to judge them like that?
What gives them the right to fuck children? What gives me the right?
Yeah.
Because I say so.
Who do you think you are?
Jack.
I'm not going to try to psychoanalyze this gameplay session, but later comments by Jeff seem to imply that he was skeptical of Shad and his artwork even all the way back in 2015.
As much as you guys think, like, I have an issue with Jeff or something, he's actually a great guy. He's actually a great guy. Just, the man has a bit of a thin skin, but a lot of people do nowadays.
That's not even a backhanded compliment, that's just an insult phrased as a compliment. Around the end of Sleepycabin's first season, a majority of its members would move across the country to LA. You know it's a good day whenever I get to use my LA stock footage. In the early days of living in LA, Shad was likely staying with or very near to Mick Lauer, aka Rice Pirate. Honestly, I implore you to check out the Kiwi farms around this time. Shad put up a single picture of his window view, and within 24 hours people were debating over the specific square foot on Google Earth where he lived. At some point, Mick would inherit ink and treasure and move into his own place over in Burbank. I'm sure nothing of note happened in that house. It's theorized theorized that Shad followed Mick and would start to live in his new house.
My milky teacup. I should not draw with Copics markers on cups. That's not gonna come out. Shit, Mick is gonna be pissed.
But we don't have any definitive confirmation of whether it was Mick's house or Shad's own place. This period is when I would consider Shad to be at his peak, in terms of popularity and presence in the online zeitgeist. He was responsible for the creation of many bizarre and comical pseudo-pornographic images that would become extremely popular. And by looking at any of his social media profiles, you would assume he was just like any other not safe for work artist. He was just a quirky old quirkster who would go to the weird and wacky places no one else was willing to go. He was certainly embraced by the alt web, with e-girls galore thirsting after and cosplaying him, and edgy dudes wearing his merch to school and shit like that. Shad's artistic influence at this time began to less resemble a fanbase, but more so an entire aesthetic. As the so-called culture war intensified online, Shad promoted an internet vibe that was unapologetic, shameless, and dripping with edge. He, without a doubt, had a significant hand in shaping alternative culture on the internet. Today, if you look at the prevalence of e-girls and femboys on TikTok, Twitter, and my hard drive, the growth of that entire subculture can be traced back to 2016 and creators like Shad. His output of lolly and shota stuff would still continue, but any serious attempts at criticism were usually shot down by his diehard fans, who would typically cite freedom of expression and, of course, the tried and true defense of, it's just a bit. It was at the beginning of 2016 that Shad would have a page about him made on Kiwi Farms. Here, users would begin to document his activities and keep a record of everything he squirted out on his website. Immediately following its creation, many were actually unsure as to whether Shad warranted a page, since his online activities didn't resemble the typical antics of a lolcow. Shad would very soon be giving them a lot more to talk about. Moving into 2016, Shad's general MO was to make porn of whatever was trending at the time, be it games, movies, politics, or even internet drama. More often than not, he would take an underage character from the IP, or just age down an adult, and draw them making a sus face. And of course, throw in some shitty memes for background noise while he was at it. It was through this method Shad was able to grow as fast as he did. When people saw art of a character from a particular game or show, that art would naturally make its way to the circles of the fandom, who would see this risque art, usually accompanied by the promise of more on shadbase.com, and then be guided, dick in hand, towards Shad's website and socials. The next significant event for Shad would be his first major controversy, which unfolded in late 2016, in the wake of the presidential election. In May 2016, Ian Hecox, aka iDubbbz, would publish content cop Keemstar. And in the aftermath of the video, and for the rest of the year, Keemstar was more or less public enemy number one on the internet. Also that year, the election. In November, during polling, Shad would announce that if Donald Trump won the presidency, he would draw Keemstar's daughter. Oh shit. It's hard to tell if the entire promise was a joke, and Shad, like many others, didn't actually anticipate Trump winning. But regardless, shortly after the results of the election were announced, Shad would produce a collage of Keemstar's daughter, in various non-pornographic but still very suggestive poses. Shortly after hearing of the image, Michael Keem would publicly announce that he was planning to take legal action against Shad. Nowadays, people cite this as one of the worst things Shad has done, but I think people forget back then just how much hatred there was for Keemstar. And the fact this was one of the few things that actually got to Keemstar, there was a very sizable crowd that supported Shad during this time. A few days later, Colossal is Crazy, who was then friends with Keemstar, would tweet about his disdain for the image and the other art on shadbase.com. Following these tweets, Shad would allow Colossal onto one of his streams, where he pressed Shad about the morals of making such a picture. The discussion would conclude with Shad admitting to Colossal he had gone too far.
Let me just be very clear. I was not calling you a paedophile. What I did was say what you did by drawing this picture, putting it in context on your website with a bunch of other pictures of little naked girls, was
Totally understand. You understand that it was obviously part of like the controversial nature of the picture to post it under such context.
It started off as a controversial joke.
Yes.
You didn't go through with it.
I would have never.
Yeah, it's pretty weird, let's all agree, and I think you're kind of a weird guy.
I totally am. I that's my thing. I
I'm
totally
sure you're
am.
a nice person, but you're a bit of a weird
I would not argue with that.
The discussion was incredibly amicable, and at the end, Shad would announce he was going to take it down. I think it's interesting that on Twitter, Shad will defend his art to the death, but as soon as he's put in a situation where he actually has to engage in dialogue with another, he folds almost immediately. Like, just time how long it takes for him to throw all of his anything is permissible in art beliefs out the window.
But I do feel like there are sexual connotations regarding that picture. Would you agree?
Totally agree. Yes, totally agree. Colossal, I respect you like a hell of a lot. And just like man to man, if you think it would be better for me to take it down, I would take it down just out of respect to you.
If you could do that, I think that would be wonderful.
You know, I'm gonna go do that right fucking now. I'm gonna take it down out of respect to fucking Colossal.
I think this whole event is pretty telling of who Shad is. When hiding behind his Shadman persona online, he had no problem engaging in highly technical debate to justify what he was doing. And you could observe this in real time upon when he returned to Twitter after the stream ended. As soon as he was back in the safety of his persona and shielded by his followers and defenders, he backtracked on his agreement with Colossal and put the image back up, albeit with the disclaimer that he was only doing this to prove it wasn't CP. What? And of course, despite the negative attention he was receiving, Shad also experienced a huge boost in engagement and followers. Seeing this, Shad likely deduced that the fastest way to keep the attention on him was to continue down this road of fostering controversy. Morals or minors be damned. And so, he set his eyes on a new target. Less than a week after the Keemstar incident, he basically did the exact same thing again. This time with 12-year-old commentary YouTuber Lieutenant Corbus, who was trending towards the end of 2016 for her young age and foul-mouthedness.
I guess I almost got injured because I know I didn't almost die.
These images were arguably even more explicit than the Keemstar ones, and once again a wave of discourse began concerning Shad and his motives. At this point, the conversation over on his page on Kiwi Farms had fully transitioned from mild disdain into full-on spiteful documentation. What can be observed here is Shad descending down into a cycle of trying to maintain relevancy at whatever cost. By branding himself as the edgelord who draws offensive shit, he had to keep pushing the limits of what he was drawing to keep attention on himself. And so fictional characters and even fictional children weren't enough anymore, and it would be his next project involving a real child that would push his career over the edge. Oh yeah, at the very end of 2016, ex-MrBeast friend Ava, then going by Chris Tyson, tweeted out this. There's surely no way this could become relevant later. On March the 1st, 2017, the film Logan would release, starring the then 11-year-old Dapne Keen as X-23. Shad, prior to the film's release, would make multiple jokes on his Discord about his apparent joke attraction to the underage actress. It's just a joke, you guys. It was a prank, we were just fooling. Actually, from many accounts, Shad's Discord was a very sus place, with various issues including minors being allowed into 18+ servers, mods abusing their power, and various unverified reports of incredibly unsavory conversations taking place there. The Discord has since been wiped, but we can assume it was an absolute den of epic, edgy humor. My sense of humor is a little dark for your taste. I make jokes about black people and mass shootings. I don't think you're ready for it, Bakuga. A few days after the film's release, Shad would upload his Dapne Keen series, featuring the actress getting With art he had done before, the depravity was in the eye of the beholder, but here it was front and center. It shot past the classification of porn and into the realm of sadistic fantasy. Shadai's defense for this piece was that the character of X-23 was a fictional character, despite the character being the same age of the actress playing her. And this was too much for most. There was still the edgelord screaming, "It's just art, man, why are you so offended?" But for almost everyone else, they could no longer defend art of this nature. You know who else this was too much for? Dapne Keen's legal team. Presumably after being made aware of the drawings, they issued a legal threat to Shadai, and soon after the art in question came down, along with his entire website. Shad initially claimed that the site coming down had nothing to do with the Keen situation or any such similar content, and would instead make a couple of jokes that implied his infringement of Roblox IP was somehow responsible. But this was soon proven false when he came forward and informed his followers that her lawyers had issued his site provider with a legal threat, resulting in Shadbase coming down. The site would eventually come back up, minus the X-23 art. Here you saw the first wave of people critiquing those who had in the past supported or affiliated themselves with Shad. In response to this, some still defended their friendships with him, citing again the separation of art and artist, although this time the defense of anything should be permissible to draw was mysteriously absent. Likewise, many stated they didn't necessarily condone what Shad was doing, but personal experience with him gave them reassurance that he wasn't a bad person. Some, however, decided that a connection to Shad wasn't a worthy hill to die on. According to later testimony from Spazkid, it was during this time that most of the old Sleepycabin friend group would start to take issue with the content Shad was creating, and as a result begin to distance themselves from him.
It kind of fucked up that Shadman was a thing, isn't it, now that you really think about it? Guy has a Nazi avatar? Oh, whatever, he's being cool, he's being edgy. Okay, how about the fact he was drawing actual children, not safe for work art of actual children, and sending it to them and doing it more than once? And people knew he did that? and continued to make defenses saying that, well, he's got my back, so... But yes, back at the time when we were still living in LA, I brought it up. It was a lot of people there at the time, but I remember I brought it up because people were saying it was fine at the time, and I said to myself, I could never get behind somebody who was seriously drawing artwork of actual kids and sending it to them like that.
That was always my problem with it. Also, hi again. It's always my problem with it is I think that goes to show that what you're getting off on is the idea of ruining a kid's life. It has nothing to do with anything else about it.
It's just harm was the point.
I expect they saw the writing on the wall, and as they moved on to bigger and better things, someone like Shad, whose only goal seemed to be to offend people, was probably the last type of person you would want to be connected to. In April of 2017, Shad would have a brief Twitter spat with Tomska over the previously discussed Eddsworld image. Tom effectively called out Shad for drawing the image before Tom or anyone else intimately connected with Ed had had any time to process his death, to which Shad's defense remained that the drawing was meant to symbolize Shad's respect for Ed, and it was his way of processing grief. The defense remained, it's just a cartoon! This was a month after getting his site temporarily taken down because he drew porn that he himself admits too closely resembled a real child. Despite this defense's success in the past, the popular opinion was changing. Despite being the man who would draw anything, he was quickly learning that the internet did have a limit. Real kids, it was real kids. 2017 would be the final year of normalcy for Shad. I mean, as normal as possible. In July of 2018, Shad's Twitter would receive its first suspension, the first in a long string of all of Shad's socials slowly getting nuked. In mid-2018, Shad would appear on a now lost stream with some of his old associates, Niall and Stamper. Not much of notice said, it's mainly slurs.
Because you couldn't stop saying
No, that was you, dude.
What? What are you talking about?
Am I bad, man? Oh no, I'm back. I'm back. Come on. Don't do that. You can't do that, dude.
In the stream, Shad discusses the closure of his Patreon, stating he took it down as a personal choice. However, the actual reason for it coming down was due to Patreon themselves banning Shad for directly making money for his website. For the remainder of 2018 and through into 2019, Shad's art output would continue to mainly consist of his webcomic format. 2020 would pass by with little of note happening, the most notable event being Shad announcing he would no longer make lolly art. For all intents and purposes, this announcement was meaningless. All it meant was that Shad would no longer directly state if a character was underage. The following year, onlookers would begin to observe a curious change in Shad. Throughout 2021, Shad's tweets would slowly begin to grow more and more nonsensical, and a sudden explosion of demented opinions and images on his Twitter in mid-2021 initially made many wonder if he had been hacked. The primary suspect? Well, who smokes meth and tweets manically on Twitter? Why, it's Will Stamper, of course! Okay, even back then, it should have been self-evident that Stamper didn't have the ability to hack Shad's Twitter. I mean, the man can't keep his own Twitter active for more than 48 hours. But the fact that people thought this should highlight how quickly this change took place. Shad's Twitter activities would come to a head in late 2021, when he began to lash out at his former Sleepycabin colleagues, including Oni, Johnny Utah, and most importantly his longtime friend, and the person who brought him to America, Spazkid. Shad and Spazkid would have a public argument on Twitter, resulting in the pair blocking each other, and the end of their decade-long friendship. I think here you get a pretty clear insight into how deep Shad had fallen into the edgy online pipeline, with him publishing these DMs between them in an attempt to illustrate how Spazkid had lost his sense of humor and become a crybaby SJW cuck, when it's pretty clear Corey was just done with his shit and Shad was low-key tweaking. Following this outburst against his former friends, they would all begin to express outright disdain for Shad and what he was doing, as well as disinterest in checking in on him, as many presumed he was under the influence of some pretty serious substances. The one contact who we know for certain was still in contact with him was Rice Pirate Mick Lauer, whom Corey would hint was performing wellness checks on the now spiraling Shad.
Funnily enough, when I saw people start to disown him, it wasn't even because of something he really did beyond, well, he's now saying mean things about the creators I like, so now I don't like him. Oh, that was the cutoff? It's like the fucking line from Community. Well, I can excuse the racism, but this is going too far. Yeah, the same thing here. Well, I'll excuse the fact that he was drawing underage people. I'll excuse that, but when he was mean to a content creator I liked...
This next section I just titled Throughout the entire latter half of 2021, Shad would frequently post pictures of the room where he was living, the images showing an incredibly unsanitary and messy living space. Many thought it was a bit, but it didn't take long for the images to be matched up to his actual room that he had previously streamed from. Throughout this period, one could observe the gradual decay of his living space. These images would grow worse and worse until suddenly Shad posted a series of troubling photos that appeared to show him living on the patio of an abandoned house and sleeping on a dirty mattress. This coincided with another series of posts that appeared appeared to show Shad exploring the old railway tracks of LA, taking pictures of the homeless and showing off a cool railway spike he had found. If you cast your mind back to his run-in with the Swiss police, you'll remember Shad has a fondness for blades. I'm sure this won't be an issue though. It's still not entirely known how he ended up in this situation. The leading theory most subscribed to is that addiction led him to sell most of his valuables and drain his savings, leaving him unable to pay rent and having to squat around LA. Again, the drug theory is supported by ex-friends and selective evidence, but we can't be certain. But I don't think anyone predicted what would happen next. In October of 2021, Shad was arrested for assault with a deadly weapon, with his hearing set for November 19th. The exact details of why he was arrested are a complete unknown, but the deadly weapon in question could be assumed to be a knife of some sorts, possibly the iconic rail spike he was pictured with days before. The news first broke on Kiwi Farms and then spread quickly across social media. Many, upon hearing the news, assumed his arrest was related to his art, but as people learnt the real reason for his arrest, they were left even more confused. Every personal account of Shadman describes him as incredibly shy and passive, so it must have been a pretty damn extreme situation if it led to him getting arrested. Before his first court appearance, he would actually be scheduled for a mental competency hearing, where the courts would deduce if he was sane enough to stand trial. Seeing as he would go on to appear in court, it's evidence he was found sane enough, but the fact that this was needed at all implies he was either in a questionable mental state when he was arrested, or that they just saw his general vibe and were like, yeah, let's get this guy certified. Can you tell I actually am a licensed therapist? Shad, after being deemed not a ding-dong loony by the state of California, was sent to jail to await his first appearance in court, with his bail set at $30,000. Despite his earlier bragging about how much he made, at this point most of his money was gone, as he was unable to pay his own bail. Just as all looked hopeless for Shad, a mysterious benefactor would come forward and pay for his bail. Who was this mystery financier? Soon after, Shad would post a couple images of him chilling in some very fancy-looking accommodation. The internet was now very aware of his arrest, and speculation began on where he was and why he was out of jail so soon. Wait a minute, look at that table. Hold on. If we cross-reference this image with one I took hiding in Mick's garden. Oh my god, is that Smokey? Why, this house is none other than legendary ink and treasure haver Mick Lowers.
Who gives better foot massages, me or Veronica? Go! Go! Don't fuck this up.
At this point in the timeline, this would be when Oni's ex Veronica had broken up with LS Mark and had briefly started dating Mick. Smokey, the woman here, still had feelings for Mick and was just knocking about his house. LS Mark was also still a frequent guest at Mick's, and apparently they all just got shit-faced and high all the time. It seemed Mick had been the one to fork over his money and pay for Shad's bail. Man, this is like Nightmare Blunt rotation. Mick, fly me out to your Incan compound. I can party like the Cali guys do. While staying at Mick's, Shad would resume activity on social media, albeit far more cautiously than before, likely due to anything he posted potentially being used against him in court. When asked about his arrest and upcoming court appearances, Shad seemed to deflect, boasting that he was in fact thriving. Yeah, sure, man. Shad would stay at Mick's for the remainder of November through to December. However, at some point, things would sour between Mick and Shad. This could possibly be due to Shad's potential drug habit, or it could simply have been that Mick didn't want someone like Shad lurking about his nice Burbank home. Mick was the last Sleepycabin member who hadn't openly disowned Shad, and so he was likely facing mounting pressure from observers to distance himself from him. It's not known exactly when Shad moved out, but Mick would type Shad a letter where he wished him well but made it clear he was no longer welcome to stay. Shad clearly didn't take this news well. On the 20th of December, he posted a photo of himself in what appears to be a dilapidated porch, with the letter now heavily defaced and mostly illegible, with drawings and text added that referenced Hunt Down the Freeman, the critically panned Half-Life fan game where Mick had voiced the main protagonist.
You fucked up my face.
This is like the unironic version of that one meme where it's like, yo, my classmate, tweaking. Even in this image here, one can observe a filthy jar being used as an ashtray, as well as multiple lighters and what appears to be a pretty heavy-duty knife. It seemed that Shad wasn't in any better place than before his arrest. Moving into 2022, Shad's social media presence was now minimal, with only the occasional semi-lucid tweet and art that resembled that shit in Slender the 8 Pages. He would even retweet a news article by The Sun covering his arrest. And then he went dark for a year and a half. Curiously though, in April of 2022, Smokey would post a cosplay of the Shadman character, and get somewhat confrontational with commenters who questioned her cosplaying such a controversial figure. Her defense of Shad would indicate that in some way they still had a friendship. In June of 2022, either due to him failing to make payments to the site provider, or of his own volition, Shadbase.com would come down. Over the following months, the only real updates the public received concerned his many court appearances, usually resulting in a continuance. His tweets became less schizophrenic, and a few posts seemed to imply that he was actually living in an apartment. How he was paying for everything is still unknown. In the summer of 2023, he would finally resume making art. A lot of the drawings seem to depict Belle Delphine. Remember her? In a response to a tweet asking about the status of his website, Shad announced that he was no longer drawing for profit. Over the next year, Shad would continue to post art, albeit at a snail's pace, and with an online presence that was a fraction of what it once was. The most notable event of 2024 didn't even involve Shad directly. Instead, it revolved around one of his old lolly drawings being seen in the bedroom of Ava Tyson, who was at the time being investigated for inappropriate conduct with a minor. This sparked a brief revival in attempts to cancel anyone who had associated with Shad in the past, but since most people hadn't associated with him in any meaningful way for almost 7 years, any attempts at quote-unquote cancellation ended before they even really got started. And aside from the occasional update of a continuance from his court appearances that are still happening, that is the end of Shadai's story. For now, at least. For such a controversial figure, it's surprising that he didn't go out in a blaze of glory, like so many other lolcows and influencers who break under the pressure. Shad, it seems, went out with a whimper, silently vanishing from the internet, but re-emerging just frequently enough to remind us that he's still alive. If I had to take a wild stab in the dark, I would say that Shad is most likely doing some kind of animation work behind the scenes in LA, possibly for one of his old contacts, or just a company that doesn't care about his sordid history. But what the future holds for him, or if we'll see him return to the internet in any meaningful way, is anyone's guess. These days, most content discussing Shad is pretty sensationalist, like painting this guy as a fucking twisted psycho who's responsible for untold horrors. I'm guilty of this as well in the video you're watching, but I think looking at him that way not only warps the truth of who he was, but feeds into his own fantasies of being this mythical edgelord who became this urban legend of the web. I think Shadai got off on the LARP of being a supervillain, which for someone who seems to have been pretty powerless for most of their life, must have been one hell of a power trip. Despite his pleading that he was misunderstood by the university staff, I think Shad liked to believe he was a menace, a man who struck fear into the hearts of normies and SJWs alike, when in reality he was just a dude drawing weird shit online, being offensive just for the sake of offending people, but deluding himself into thinking that what he was doing was somehow pushing the boundaries of creativity.
And at this point, it's really far beyond the money, fucking the porn. It's far beyond any of that.
What I'm saying is Edge, like any true katana, needs to have a purpose, because otherwise, it's like fucking try hard. I'll end this video with the big question. Do I think Shad was actually into what he was drawing? Honestly, no. You're welcome to disagree, but between his various run-ins with the law and schizo behavior, I think if he had any serious illegal intentions, it would have floated to the surface and been uncovered by observers or the police. But I do think he has some incredibly questionable and dangerous beliefs relating to things like age of consent and sexual expression. That's just a theory. Cue the outro. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'm sorry this took so long to get out. I've been very busy IRL. I think I've reached the end of the Newgrounds Falling Off trilogy. If there's anyone you think I should talk about next, please just leave a comment below. But again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in another video.